Hey, what's up, everyone? Thanks for coming and hanging out at this workshop. My name's Ian McIntosh. This is Jeffrey Kunde. We're with Jesus Culture. This is going to be like about 90 minutes. We're going to focus in on what roles different instruments play in a band and what it takes to sound great on a worship team on a Sunday. We're going to make these workshops, and we're potentially, however, depending upon how this goes, we're going to end up doing more of them. And we're going to make these workshops free for anyone in the world to watch. We're going to stream them in couple different time zones. You'll see if you click the schedule button that there's a couple encore replays available. And then if you want to own it, if you love it, you want to own it and watch it again later and reference it, you can buy it today for about half off what we're going to be offering it for later when we do eventually put it online to buy. I'm not sure when that would be. There's going to be a giveaway going on behind the scenes while this is happening. Basically, if you saw it when you registered, there's about $1,000 worth of gift cards being given away by Sweetwater, and we want to thank them for that. They were very generous in offering that, and you can win, I think the top prize is a $250 gift card, which is just awesome. So there's still a chance to do that. You have your share link, you can go share that. And after this workshop, you should be able to check your email and see, and it'll tell you whether you're a winner. If you're not a winner, you didn't get an email, so you'll have like a day or two to reply. Before we get started, if you could take a minute and introduce yourself in the chat, say hi, say where you're from, state, city, country. That it's always fun to see whoever shows up to these workshops, and all around the world. We've had people before from Ireland and New Zealand, and I've had people from South Africa and Brazil, and it's just really exciting to see what's going on. And if you want to say what instrument you play in the chat too, that'd be great.
Yeah.
All right, so grab a notepad and maybe a cup of coffee or tea, and let's go ahead and get going.
Yeah, on that note, let me introduce myself. I'm Jeffrey. If you're part of my audience, maybe then you don't know Ian. This is Ian. Ian and I are bandmates, longtime friends, 10 years, 12 years now. Ian and I have been working together for all that time, so 10, 12 years in the studio, traveling the world together in Jesus Culture, which you've probably heard of, and we are also producers, so we produce music. If you're an artist, you would come to us and we would take your songs and create an album for you, and if you're familiar with the production process, you know what I'm talking about. But Ian and I are music producers, and I'm also a music director at our local church, Jesus Culture Sacramento, which is in Folsom, California. And both of us have been on staff and involved heavily at Bethel over the years of being friends. And so that's where we're coming from. We're coming from just a perspective of working with bands for all these years, whether it's in the studio, whether it's people we hire, or working with worship teams of all sorts of different levels, from intermediate, advanced, beginners. Ian and I have been in the church since we were kids, and been on worship teams since we were kids. You know, we both grew up playing music, so that's kind of the perspective we're coming from, and a brief overview of our history together and our professional history. What we're here today to do is to talk about common problems in the industry of worship, of the we'll talk about common problems that we see on worship teams, in local churches, among bands. You know, we're in a really 2017 is a very tracks-heavy culture. You know, multi-tracks and these different resources you can get. All these tracks that the laptop guy uses to make your sound huge. And what we're seeing is that a lot of teams are relying so heavily on the tracks that there maybe need some pointers, or need to be pointed in the right direction as far as just being a musician. And we'd love to just talk about musicianship today as it pertains to the different roles: guitar, bass, drums, and keys. Those are the most common for a worship team. We won't be talking about any saxophone today, I'm sorry. But you know, if you're a saxophone player, you might pick up some tips here too. So what we want to, yeah, maybe. Keep watching though. Anyway, what we like to do is sort of define a musician's role. You know, what are we doing when we show up on a Sunday? Why are we there? What is the goal that we're going after as a musician and as a band? And let's just head the right direction together. You know, let's all get on the same page and create a goal. That's one thing that we do as producers, is we point our band towards a reference or to a certain sound, and we just say, let's all get on the same ship and go there together. So that's step number one, I think, is just saying, hey, we're going to go towards a goal, and we're all a team. We're going to get there together, and here's some pointers on how to do that.
Yeah, I think it's really important to lay that kind of foundation that allows you. It's we, like Jeffrey was saying, we started youth group. We started without any technology. I started without Click, and there's a foundation of how to actually approach playing as a band and how to approach playing with other musicians, and even just the approach of what it means to make music. It really sets a foundation for you to grow and become more skillful, more creative, and fulfilled in what you're doing creatively. And along the notes of what we're trying to accomplish when it comes to making music, I know you have a few thoughts about that.
Yeah, I mean, what I want to say about that goal topic that we're talking about is that what do we want our listeners to experience, basically. So if I'm making a song in the studio or playing live, I'm doing so not for myself, but I'm doing so to take the listener on a journey. Whether that's building a set list or just playing one song, I want to pull on your emotions and I want to show you something, to start somewhere, to get somewhere, and to end somewhere, and having like that long-term vision of what ride do I want my listeners to be on. If it's worship music, what corporate experience do I want to lead people in? I'm basically saying, hey, come follow me. This is where I'm going, and taking people on this ride. It's not a roller coaster ride. Hopefully, it's a corporate experience. If you've ever been to like a concert, you know what I'm talking about, especially great concerts. The greatest performers know how to take their audience on this emotional journey throughout the night. And so we want to really talk about that and how it pertains to each instrument. There's really five or six jobs that I think are key for every instrument on stage. So before we jump into each instrument individually, I want to harp on just some real basics that Ian and I agree on, that we teach to our students and are always have at the forefront of our mind. The first one is to make your leader look awesome. So as a guitar player, as a keyboard player, my job is to, whatever song they bring, is to set them up. I like to call it slow pitching. I am giving them a softball pitch, and I'm just setting them up to hit a home run. So that basically means being prepared, but also just whatever they want to do, kind of figure out the best way to back them up and to showcase them as the leader, because they're the one with the microphone. They're the one who is touching people. They're the point of contact, and I'm the support behind them. So and there's a lot of specifics behind that as it pertains to every instrument, and we'll get into that. But just having that in your mind, that I'm not there for me as much as I'm there for the leader, and to push them and say, you are awesome, and I'm going to be your man. I got your back, and let's go there together. But you can fall back on me, basically. Job number 2 is to fill the role that's needed. So as an instrumentalist, I want to show up and look at what's going on stage or within the song, and not bring my own baggage or my own agenda. Yeah, that's good. But to just realize what's needed musically and to fulfill that role. Do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that varies, right? And that's why it's important to have that heart of being able to. All of these things, we're going to talk about a few different jobs, but are about serving and serving the set and serving the experience and the leader and whatever the Lord's doing in the room, right? It's about serving that moment on stage and laying your needs, your pride, your whatever. There are times that I just play pad on stage, and that's my role, and that's fine. And there are times that
or not play
at all. Yeah. That's exactly right. Sometimes it calls to do absolutely nothing, and sometimes sometimes I get kicked out of the pad roll by the dumb electric anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
So.
Like it does. But the point is to sit there and approach it from the perspective of what can I do best right now for this song, and whatever that is, you should do it. And each instrument, in and of itself, has a specific thing it can do. Right? They each fill different kinds of sonic space, and can create a sort of emotion and touch on something that the other instruments don't do that well. With the exception of maybe, in a computer you can hit play and make anything happen, I guess. But you know what I'm saying.
We're setting that aside today. You can always fall back to that.
Yeah.
Job number 3, I like to say eyes up, head up. So as a musician, we get in this like, I sound amazing, my monitor mix amazing, I'm going to close my eyes and just go for it. And that's not the way a band works. Bands are eye contact, their body language, they are noticing what people are doing. If the bass player is doing something, what am I going to do to react to that? And I can't do that by being in my own world. So, I'm a musician, a great musician, a professional musician has their eyes on the rest of the band and is just being aware. Like this, a lot of this is like self-awareness talk right now, and just being aware of why I was chosen, what my role is, and what other people are doing, and how do I fit that into that piece, like a puzzle piece.
Yeah, there's a practical level to that too, right? Like, eyes up, head up. You can't follow the leader if you're not looking at them.
Exactly.
If they give you a hand signal and that they're not, or there are times, Josh and I will look across the stage at each other and like kind of, are we doing it now? Are we going now? And and pull the trigger based upon that. And if my head's down and not doing it, first off, the tracks can go completely haywire. But secondly, the band can just be a complete, nightmare.
Yeah, and we don't use within Jesus culture. We don't really use a what do you call it? A BM mic? MD mic. Sorry, I don't even know the name because we don't use
what
one.
does that tell you?
At our church, we don't really use one. And this isn't a harp against it. It's just the culture that we've built within our band and within our church is that we just keep this eyes up, head up culture where we don't really need the MD mic because we're always aware of what everybody else is doing. And if there ever becomes a need to call an audible, like, hey, we're going to go to this progression, we might have the mic available to do that, but it's not like we're calling out each section or we're calling out the next song in the order. It's because we're always, for one thing, the order could change, and that's the great thing about being in a band is that it's this organic, evolving thing. It's not tracks. It's not like we're pressing a button and I'm a robot up there just playing my part. It's a band where we are organic, and the only way that we can flow and become one unit is with this connection between each other. That's with the eyes, what's with the ears, and with body language, like I said. So
yeah, and I think that what we're talking about to some degree is a different, I think if you were to ask me what's the difference between a normal worship team and a more band-style worship team, I would say it's the level of responsibility that each band member holds over everything. We're talking about make the leader look awesome. Well, that's a level of responsibility over the entire set. That's fill the role that's needed. The responsibility over the arrangement, over the song, eyes up, head up. The responsibility to your team and to your people. Like it's a level of mindfulness or in the moment, a level of being present in the moment that most people never get to. And there are so many people who show up on Sundays to jam and hang out and to have this creative outlet for their music. But what really separates the people who excel at this and the people who make that shift is this sense of responsibility that what I do, the note I play, the exact tone it feels, the way I play it, the intensity. If you're playing guitar, it might just be the way you feel, but like it really does matter, and it really impacts everything on the stage.
Yeah, I feel this sense of responsibility when I'm on the stage that like what I do could lead the rest of the band. At any moment, like what I play in the space provided, or the opportunity that I might take to like step out and do something, or to cue somebody, or whatever, could lead that moment, which could affect people, which takes the worship into a moment and then changes lives.
Absolutely.
We all have this story of, that one time when I was in worship, or in a moment where like I look back on when I was like 14, this thing happened that God showed me this and it changed my life forever. And what if that started with Jeffrey just cueing something? You know what I mean? So in a way, I have this overwhelming sense of like I have the most important job in the world, because what I do right now, the decision that I might make might impact someone in 40 years from now. That might be that moment they remember. So,
and that happens on Sundays.
Yeah.
That's not
that's
just on
a
stage in
regular
front of
thing.
that's not just a stage in front of 10,000 people. That
Yeah.
happens on Sunday at your church.
So that's, obviously that's a live situation, but I mean, that has to do with studio, that has to make decisions within production arrangements and everything. So yeah, let's move on.
Yeah.
Job number 4, staying relevant to the industry. Now this is a big one because what we're doing, we're always moving forward. We're trying to at least stay up with modern music, if not advance it. And there's a difference between enjoying modern music and then getting to the stage or to the studio and then falling back on what I do or what I'm comfortable with or what I've known because I grew up playing Jimi Hendrix or whatever it is. And just being aware of where music's headed, where it is now, and not necessarily not being my own person, but just being aware, just that sense of awareness of the industry.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is one of those catch-22s, right? Like no one wants to not be their own creative person, but at the same time, this is that level of responsibility in serving, and I think that if you're feeling any frustration over that thought of like I need to play a style I don't love or I need to jump into something I don't love, I think that this is where it's a level of communication you need to have with your leader and to talk about and figure out where you're headed, And if you're a leader watching this, like there's a level of like you should be hanging out and talking with your team and casting that vision for where you're headed. And I think as far as like staying relevant to the industry, there's a reason, again, if we're talking about serving people and having people respond emotionally and in the room to something and leading people towards something, there's a reason that there's certain styles that are working right now, and there are certain things that are working, that there are trends and directions. And I don't completely understand it. No one, you could probably write some stupid paper on it or something, but like there's a level of, if everyone's moving towards that and responding to it, it would be kind of foolish to leave it by the wayside, not touch it at all, and just say that's not me and turn my nose to it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think it could be spiritual. It's like music is music is anointed, and it might be that the Lord is showing us
sure
this new thing, and let's just get on board with it. So
that's good.
Anyway, job number 5, our final rule of thumb is to come as prepared as possible. At Jesus Culture, we don't practice a whole lot. We practice on our own. So we have this culture where, and it partly has to do with our limitations within our building that we're in currently, but it's also the way we've always been, is that we rehearse on our own. We get the set list out, 5-6 days in advance, and we're doing whatever we need to do to prepare for Sunday. And then Sunday morning for us right now looks like half an hour of sound check, half an hour of rehearsal, if that.
Right.
So our musicians are very good. They're very competent. And they know that if they aren't prepared, they don't show up prepared knowing their parts, they're just, it's just not going to work out for us. So that's, I say job number 5, but these are almost like rule number 1s, just rule number 1, rule number 1, 2, rule number 1, 3. So
that's rule number 1.
Yeah, that rule number 1 is come as prepared as possible.
Yeah.
The less mistakes you make in a rehearsal, the more awesome people are going to think you are, which is always a plus. You're going to look and feel and be an appeasing person to be in a band with. I want to be someone who's known as being a rock solid musician who's never going to make mistakes, even in rehearsal. Think of rehearsal as your first impression that you're giving your band. And if you're making mistakes in rehearsal, how are they going to trust that you're not going to make those mistakes when it comes to the performance? So I think of every time I'm in front of people as a pretty big deal. I don't want to show up and be rehearsing. I want to show up and be pre-performing. I guess I would call it. Yeah.
Oh, and there's nothing more maddening either. It's important that
Yeah.
everyone does this, because there's nothing more maddening than showing up and having one person, like say the drummer,
Yeah.
who just doesn't know the song. And so you go through the whole thing, and over again you're like, you haven't even listened to the dumb song, have you? You haven't even listened to it. There's just nothing more well to me anyway. Maybe that's just
Right.
me.
No, it's true. And arrangements these days don't work if one person's not playing their role. So you guys get the point, obviously. But those are our 5 rules that we wanted to go through first. Now we're going to jump into the specifics of every instrument. Ian, take it away on drums. What do you think?
Yeah, so when we're talking about drums, basically, I mean, we all know what drums are, but drums establish the feel of the song first and foremost, like the actual kind of feeling of the tempo. And I don't mean literally the BPM, I mean the feeling of how fast the song is moving, the whether it's dragging or pushing. It's able to control that level of energy first and foremost before any other instrument. Really dragging drums are not going to be really overpowered by, it's not a series of pluses and minuses that balance each other out, like the rushing acoustic guitar fixes the laid back drums or something. Like that's the worst. So it's really important that the drums establish that tempo and that feel. They also excel very well at controlling dynamics, right? Like it's the one of the few instruments that's able to make a shift very quickly and be able to impact the room very quickly, even from the standpoint of what happens in a sound system. If you think through, and you're all at different levels of sound and whatever as far as your systems go, but like if you're in a room that has some subs and has some low end going, like the ability the drums can affect the low end, and the kick can really impact and sound like a big thunder hit or something. And then they also have the shiny high end where the cymbals are able to really impact that. And a lot of people don't think about that. And this is something Josh, our drummer, talked to me about that made me just kind of have an aha moment. This idea of what happens once you introduce a different level of the frequency spectrum, and that he's able, at one moment he's able to just let the high end sizzle around, maybe in a transition or something. And at a different moment he brings the low end in, and what that actually does with the dynamics. I would say it's one of the most important instruments that needs to, quote unquote, feel right. You can kind of, we all know, the perfect example of this is like the robot drummer who plays the right thing, but it just feels like a robot drummer. Mm-hmm. Or the person who plays well, but all of a sudden in the fill just gets super sloppy. Like mm-hmm. the feel on drums really can be obvious, and some other instruments I think can be a little more forgiving, but for the drums, the ability to feel exactly intentional is really important. And I mean that intentional. When you listen to different albums and different ways things are pulled off, and if you try to recreate that, which that's not something we really talked about, but one of the ways that I grow a lot is by analyzing albums I love and trying to figure out what they're doing and recreating it. And if you do that as a drummer, like pay attention to how the drum fill actually feels.
And God bless all you drummers out there, because we are just in your business so much. Like in the studio, Ian and I are relentless with drummers.
Poor Josh.
Because we're just like they have their opinion of the way the drums convey emotion. We have our opinion of the way drums convey emotion. And I love that push and pull, that give and take between a relationship of a drummer and the rest of the band, because it means that you really care, and there's so much value in the drums. They are
how important they are.
So important, you know what I mean? So they're going to be the driving force of the emotion of the experience, like what we're talking about. So
yeah, and so if you're, to improve and move forward, you're going to want to look at a couple things. One is to learn about restraint and to understand and really listen to like how some of the legends in our industry, whether you're talking rock and roll like AC/DC or Coldplay or U2, or even in the Christian world, the Passions and and Hillsong and whatever, and to really listen to how little they actually will play sometimes, and how very subtle the shifts are. Sometimes literally all you need to build from a verse to a chorus is a slight shift in the kick pattern, or just a cymbal hit even, or a really dramatic drum fill or something. Like that level of restraint is something that I feel like is a very common mistake with drummers, to basically, go 0 to 100 way too fast. To like all of a sudden, you do a chorus, you get to the bridge, and you're going to do this big build, and before the leader's ready to really ramp it up, you're ahead of them, and you're building past them and getting way past them, and then all of a sudden when they're really ready to kick in, and Kim's like giving you the chorus signal or giving you the go for it signal, it's gone.
Yeah, one thing I love about a great live drummer is that if it feels like they know how to push back on a leader in just the right way. So like the leader's going this way, and the drummer is going that way too, but he's kind of holding back while they're going, How do I do that? Yeah. So, and it creates so much tension in the room. So a drummer knows when the release is going to happen, or when they want the release to happen, and is able to stretch out that tension as much as possible. And that's kind of the difference between a great drummer and a good drummer, is someone who, can hit that moment at the right spot. Because once you do this, it's over. There's nowhere to go from there. Yeah. But a build and knowing how far to stretch it out is really key in the drums.
Absolutely. Part of that is the ability to know when you should pull the trigger, right, and then have the confidence to do that. It's another thing. We've played with drummers who are very good skillfully and in the studio sound amazing, and then you put them on a live stage and there's something about like they just won't pull that trigger. Like they know it's there, they know it needs to happen. Everyone feels it. The crowd feels it. I feel it. They're looking like excited, yeah, but they just won't pull that trigger. The drum fills just, instead of like sakadoom, it's just doo-doo. Or something, just something dumb, or just a cymbal hit, or they just don't get there. And so having that, it's this weird.
By the way, in the comments right now, just write down your drummer language. Like, what is it? His is sakadoon. Actually, you know what? Don't do that. That's fine.
Don't do that. Oh boy. Okay, yep. Anyway, another thing that we've noticed that's interesting, that this is something Josh does quite a bit. That's really fascinating, and some really great live drummers have this tendency how do I want to say this? It's not never stop playing. I just said to show restraint, but it's this idea that once you do stop playing entirely, it almost just, the energy just got sucked into a black hole. Like it just stops. Like, so there's this, I've noticed this more and more and more, even with great teams, like some really, really good teams and really great people will end up playing, doing the drum fill at the end, and then just and then stop, and then put the sticks down, and
the leader might want to go on, and they do this down moment, and every song after every song becomes this down leader moment,
or can be,
and I think a great drummer knows how to carry energy without being loud, without being a force of nature that no one can stop. It's more like a drummer can just carry the rhythm, even if they're not like fully playing, basically.
Yeah, and sometimes it's something as simple as, just practically, it's something as simple as what we'll call writing on the cymbals. Yeah. And it's not, it's just really, really light tinkles, I guess, on the cymbals that just kind of drive around after a song and float around and whatever. So instead of letting it just completely fall, swell at the end. We call it a trash can, where you just you're letting the cymbals go, and then the band eventually will get back into something, or we'll go back into the previous chord progression or whatever have you. But being able to sort of keep something happening, some kind of energy.
Yeah, sometimes good drummers will just like do open and close hi-hat on 2 and 4.
It's a great one.
Maybe just light hi-hat or something, no kick. Light snare, no
even
kick,
tapping the hi-hat.
Yeah, even tapping. So there's lots of different variations of that. I think what we're just basically saying is, once the drummer stops, the band's gonna stop eventually. So being aware of that, of like how far do you want this moment to go, and if you want it to go a while, then your drummer needs to be carrying the moment. Otherwise, it's just gonna be boring.
And what we're talking about, I mean, again, this entire workshop is going to keep harping back to this level of this idea of personal responsibility over your role,
right?
And the idea that you didn't just play the song and end and you're done until the next song starts. Like there's something between. You have a role there. Keys players have a role there. Bass players, guitar players. Everyone always has a role in every moment, and dropping that is always going to be a mistake. But with drums, it's something that you see frequently, just ending the song and being done. On a really practical sort of tip, I guess, what I've noticed, one of the trends I've noticed in where I personally think, as a producer, our industry and the Christian world's headed, and what's been going on in the secular world for a while in the kind of pop scene, but I think it's especially prevalent in this world, is the idea of, rather than building a song with dramatic. Words are hard. New word. Dramatic shifts, rather than building a song with you go to just blast beats, or you go to huge rock beats. Letting a song, it's this idea of a beat, the perfect beat for a song, the perfect groove. And I don't mean beat like a rap beat, a hip hop beat. I mean like the kick pattern being super, unbelievably intentional for that particular song. Mm-hmm. And you hear this in the kind of and by pop I don't mean EDM. I mean like the stuff on the radio that's actually a song. Mm-hmm. Okay, went there. Mm-hmm. But that hasn't. They're very particular in the kick pattern and the beat, and a lot of it feels similar, but it's very different, and it really can change the direction of the song. And the reason I think this is so prevalent in our world, why it's headed there, is we've gotten this crew of songwriters all over the world. You have people in Reading and in Sacramento and in Nashville and in Australia, and there's it's unbelievable how good they can be at writing a worship song, mm-hmm. right? Like how good it's getting stupid, mm-hmm. right? Like it's getting crazy, and
you need a worship song. You need it to be perfect. Here you go.
It's unbelievable that I think that it's no longer, you used to really get all these shifts and these emotions by pushing the music and pushing these dynamic shifts in the band really intentionally. And I think that now there's a level of that the best way to support this perfectly written song is to find this beat that we just drive home and drive home and drive home. And some of this looks like really, this can be very, very simple. This is I don't have a lot of really great specific examples, but the idea is really easy. It's like where throughout a song... Fierce, that's a good example, where the kick pattern stays the same. There's some tom hits that happen that follow the kick pattern. It's really intentional. It's actually... I never get this right. You can tell me. It's maybe 16-bar loop rather than a 4-bar or something. Like the loop is longer. Mm-hmm. It feels like... It only through the whole verse, and the verse is long. I think it only repeats once. Mm-hmm. The whole verse is actually one section repeated, because it's like zoo, zuka, zoo, zuka, zoo, zoo, zuka, zoo, zoo. Like it's like it just adds a little hit here and there, but the whole thing is uber intentional and follows through the whole song. And it follows around the whole song. We did a little bit of this also on the new album, Weight of Heaven, did this, but with the high end and with the acoustics. And that's kind of where we got intentional with it on the new album, is with the high end and with some of those kinds of patterns. And so on Weight of Heaven, you have an acoustic that's pushing on these specific accents. And you'll hear the shaker shake on the specific accents, and then the hi-hat, and then the snare at the end of the song. And there's this thing and this rhythm that if you wanted to, you could clap a pattern throughout the whole song, and it would line up with an accent somewhere. Mm-hmm. And there's something really magical about it, and how it allows the energy to build in a really unique way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and when you do that, you're also giving space for other band members to create energy in ways that they haven't. So if for instance, Fierce is mostly the verse and the chorus is closed hi-hat, right? Mm-hmm. Both. And so it's cool to be able to do something on the keys or on the guitar that lift that section, but the drums don't really lift. So there's always all these little production tricks that we try and implement, and that has to do with what we're hearing in 2017, what's on the radio, what's popular right now, and it's driving us to be better, basically. So.
And from a practical worship music standpoint, if you show restraint in those dynamics with drums, then when you do finally get there, that you can pull the trigger. Even if you break all. First off, one of the things we like to say, and I think this came from Brian Johnson at one point in time, was these are the rules. but feel free to break them if it's flipping awesome.
Yeah.
Right? If it's really awesome, just break them. It's fine. But if it's not awesome, you really should stick to the rules.
Right.
Right? Like,
Yeah.
and so, if you break this thought of like, a beat the whole song, okay, fine, throw it out the window. When you actually hit a build at some moment, it has so much more impact. Right? Like, and when you show restraint for a while, when you do shift that dynamic and you finally kind of let the cat out of the bag, it really is way more impactful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Anyway, I think that's all I got for drums.
Yeah.
But
All right, bass. Let me tell you how important you are. You carry almost 50% of the emotion of the whole room. You have the ability to make me feel like I have no legs all of a sudden, or drive the whole room in this like wave of emotion. You are an emotional instrument. So I'm really passionate about talking about bass tone, about what a bass should do, what it shouldn't do. Bass players always, a common thing bass players say is, I'm just a bass player. I don't have much to say. I'm just a bass player. I'm just here to play bass. And I just couldn't disagree more. Basically, I think the bass, though at times might be a simpler, less complicated instrument, it carries a lot of, just a great deal of value within a band. You can't have a band without a bass player, and you can't have a great band without a great bass player who really understands their role, knows what they're doing, knows how to play the bass, and knows what they carry. A lot of times that has to do with when a bass player is playing and when they're not playing. It's as simple as that. A bass entrance or an exit can pull on the listener's like heart. It's incredible. I love it. A good example of that might be like we recorded a record called Come Away back in the day, and a song, the title song, Come Away, on the bridge, if you go to listen to it, you'll notice all of a sudden the drums go into this like fast snare roll thing, and the guitar has this line, and it's just like all of a sudden you're just like, wow, this sounds so cool, and your ear automatically goes to like what's the two things that are happening, the drums and the guitar, and that's because there's no bass. Like all of a sudden by not playing the bass, you were just like, here you go, everybody shine. I'm just going to create this amazing moment by not playing. And like there's this amazing vocal loop, and like there's all this stuff happening in the high end that I'm getting chills about right now just talking about, because it's like so amazing just because the bass dropped out. It's incredible. And then when the bass comes back in and you're just like, yeah, that's amazing. Like what is happening right now? It's so cool. And we use that trick at least once a record. Gosh, we probably overuse it. Another good example would be like My Everything. What record is that from? Chicago, maybe. There's a re-intro after the first chorus where it just goes guitar and drums again. I think the drums is like doing something simple just on the ride, and like a little bit of light snare, and the guitar is finger picking, and all of a sudden there's no bass. And most listeners are like, don't even realize that there's no bass, but then once the verse 2 hits and the bass comes back in, you're just like,
it sets it up perfect.
You're like, this verse is amazing, and it's because of the bass. So I love that. Like I said, the bass just carries so much emotion about when it's playing and when it's not playing. I think the challenge of most bass players is to fight against overplaying. A bass player might fight boredom, just pure and simple. You are doing one thing, and you can't forget about how important that one thing is that you're doing, and keep your mind locked in. I think that's the main issue of a bass player, is have a dedicated mind to like the importance of the thing that I'm assigned to do, and that is to hold down the low end of whatever chord is being played. We'll talk about intervals and stuff in a minute, but in music classes they'll teach you a chord. Just because the guitar player is playing a chord, that doesn't make if within the context of a band, that's not the chord. The chord is the whole band. So whatever the lowest note being played is, that defines what the chord is, basically. So that bass player is defining all the chords, And without a bass player, you have no definition of chords, and without a dedicated bass player who's playing dedicated things or intentional notes, then you have no chordal structure within your band, and that's a bummer, man. That's not going to work out. So just being an intentional bass player goes a long way. It's the bass players that Ian and I pick to be on records and to be in our bands on stage. People that just really understand their role, that aren't over players and not under players either. It's the guys that know how to follow a kick pattern, and know when to follow the kick pattern and when not to follow the kick pattern.
Yeah.
When to play whole notes and when to drive with the rhythm, because it's a very rhythmic instrument. A lot of times, new bass players will just say, "Oh, you don't know how to play the bass? Great. Just play the notes that are on the chord chart and follow the kick pattern." And Brian Johnson always used to say the greatest bass players are the beginners, because they don't overplay and they just play the notes on the page and they follow the kick, and that's like all I want. And that's not true, because the greatest players know how to do that, but also understand the role and have been doing it for years and years and years. But there's a lot of truth to his statement, and what he's saying is that the overplayers really can kill the room fast. They can kill the recording fast. They can kill the emotion of the song really fast. Anybody who's playing notes outside the chord or like improvising a lot, that's just like a big no-no in bass playing. And I don't want to say that to bore the bass player. I'm just saying it to like reassure you of your job. Your job is to do the bass player's job.
It's exceptionally important.
And not anything else. And we love you for it. You're amazing. So go ahead.
I want to, and I'll say as a producer, working with someone who can put on any of those hats at any moment is astounding. Mm-hmm. I worked on a song recently for a church in Chicago, I think, where I sent a song to Brandon to work on for bass, and he sent back literally 3 different versions of the same verse. He said, "I didn't know if you wanted me to do the funky bass or the driving bass or whole notes, so I just sent it all to you." And I put it in and sent it to Jeremy, because literally all 3 of them were awesome.
Yeah.
All 3 of them felt amazing, and it was an A+ at every single version of it. Like, and it's a treat. Like, you rarely. Right. And he didn't have any emotional attachment to it. He's like, "Well, I think, whatever. Okay, cool, done, boom, burn." Right. And I'm like, dang. And
an important thing, we should have put as job 6 of every musician on stage. Rule number 1/6 or -6 is being a good decision maker.
Yeah.
Knowing how to read a moment and make the right decision is really important for the bass. To do what Brandon did for Ian, come up with 3, but then to make the right choice. Yeah. And to read the room and decide what the room needs, what the leader needs, what the song needs. And a lot of times it's what the song placement in the set. What does that song need because it's song 3 instead of song 1? And that's done by reading the room, knowing the set, but just like eyes up, head up kind of mentality. So
you just blew my mind.
Yeah.
I never thought about that.
Yeah.
Song 1 versus 3 for bass.
It's a big deal. It's a big deal. Kind of a pro tip for bass players, if you're looking for something new to try out. We see it a lot in modern music today, especially in worship music. A lot of times we'll hear guitars be less dirty, more clean, so more like intricate stuff on top. But you don't miss that rhythm guitar, and that's because you may not be cognitively thinking about it, but it's because the bass player dirtied up and got this less low end, more mid-rangey dirt, and is playing like a rhythm guitar. So we've used that technique a little bit, and we hear it on albums that other people are doing, that there's like all of a sudden the bass player took on a rhythm guitar player role, and it can create a really cool effect. I encourage you guys to go out and try it, and it kind of frees up, kind of like the way the drums did in that chorus of Fierce, by not going to crashing cymbals, by staying on the hi-hats. It frees us up to do like other things that we wouldn't normally do. It's the same thing with the driving dirty bass. It kind of is like, oh, well, I don't have to play rhythm guitar anymore. I'm going to write a new line and have these like dancing lines. It's going to be awesome. It's going to create some new texture. So that's a little pro tip for you.
You hear a lot of that on the new Bethel stuff, right?
Yeah,
like
exactly.
A lot of the last couple of Bethel albums heavily make use of distorted bass, and it sounds great. Awesome.
Totally. All right, with that, we want to transition into talking about our sponsor, Sweetwater.
Yeah, it's been awesome. Sweetwater, a lot of people don't get it. Like, they think of Sweetwater as an online guitar center, and it couldn't be further from the truth, right? Like, Sweetwater is very different in that if you've ever been to their compound, you understand. And I call it a compound because it's like this gigantic, huge space.
It's Google for music.
It's Google for music. That's absolutely accurate. And they have this really, it's incredible. They're able to help people at a level that a Guitar Center can't, that a normal retailer can't. For example, their tech support, their ability to understand what's going to work in your situation from a tech support standpoint is second to none. I actually did this recently. The interface that right now is recording this audio for this video is going through a PC. Sorry. I do use PCs for a lot of stuff, and I'm using it to record video, and it's streaming live and all this stuff too. And I had to figure out, I wanted to upgrade to a UAD interface. And I had to figure out whether it was going to work well with a PC, because it gets a little glitchy in audio interface land with PCs, and I really wanted to know if it was going to function right. And I didn't want to have to buy something and return it. And I was using an RME, and that thing worked like $1 million, but I wanted to get into the UAD world. And I actually called up Derek, my sales rep, and this is another thing. Like, I know my sales rep's name, right? Like, it's different.
Yeah.
And
he
I asked him.
He
sends me candy. And I asked him about it, and he said, "Let me call you back." And basically, I don't know who he emailed, but someone there, he called, he asked whatever, and got back and said, "Here's what we're putting in. Here's how you can tell." And he gave me exactly what I needed to know. And that's, I couldn't find that answer online. UAD couldn't tell me that answer.
Right.
Right? Like, I asked you, and there's a level of that that's, completely unique. And even, if you're a church, and this is a common thing, like, there are churches who are trying to figure out what technology matters, right? Mm-hmm. Like, everyone says that their world matters. Like, Jeffrey's going to try to get you to buy a $3,000 pedal board. I'm going to try to get you to buy, I'm actually the anomaly. I won't get you to get a redundant rig, but there are guys who want you to get redundant tracks rigs, and, and multi-tracks is all about their iPad setup, and there's all of these different things in this technology out there, and there's in-ears, and there's stereo mixes, and sub, mono system, stereo system. Like, there's all of these things, and everyone has their agenda. But Sweetwater is unique in that they actually care about making sure that your next step matters and is meaningful. And so, like, their worship department is able to talk to you on a level for your church and with your team and even in your personal world that no one else is going to be able to. That the advice you get, while, yeah, they're trying to sell you something, I've personally heard stories, they've done it with me, and I know that they don't just recommend the pricey, cool option, the hip option. They're not going to try to get you to buy the $5 latte because it looks cool, right? They're trying to get you exactly what you're looking for. And honestly, I trust them. We've worked with them. I trust them with what I do, and I call them. And, that interface was a flipping expensive investment for what I was actually doing. And I could have got away with something much cheaper if I, and so it's one of those, like, it gave me the confidence to be able to know, and it's been worth it. And their advice was great.
Yeah. I don't have that in-depth of an experience with them, but I have made a lot of purchases through Sweetwater, and what I can tell you is that it's a very personal experience. Regardless of whatever I'm buying, they're always going to give advice when needed and be, like, very responsive. And one time I bought something, an expensive piece of equipment that I'd like to not mention just because I don't want to talk bad about it, but it broke down, and I immediately emailed my rep, and within days I had a new one. It was like, let's bypass the product warranty, let's just get you a new thing, and let's just take care of this. So it was more like, I feel like they have my best interest in mind, even though they're a company. It's like this friend sort of relationship. So yeah, can't say enough good things about Sweetwater. Thanks again for what you're doing, and you guys are gonna win some cool stuff within this little thing we're doing, so it's gonna be great.
Yeah, and just the final thing with them, like, is I would encourage you, like, I get questions, and I know Jeffrey gets these kinds of questions, and all of us, everyone wants to know, what interface are you using? What computer are you using? What's the exact specs on X, Y, or Z? And honestly, my answer usually is that's the wrong kind of question. Like, it's you have to know more about your situation, and your situation is unique. And me just telling you what I use won't necessarily work in your world, right? Like it's like wearing your own clothes. Like whatever you're doing in your particular church, your particular environment is going to be different. The exact Ableton setup I have would confuse the crap out of a lot of you, not because you're dumb and not because I'm like some mad scientist genius or something like that, but because I've built it idiosyncratically for me.
Right.
And it's my own little world.
Yeah.
And so I always refer people, I've done this before they sponsored our event. This isn't, this has nothing to do with this. I always say, call Sweetwater and ask them. They'll have a way better answer than anything I can tell you. Like, tell them what's going on, tell them what your problem is, and they're going to be able to point you in a much better direction than me. So, yeah, we love Sweetwater.
High five.
All right, let's hit back to guitar.
All right, guitar. Great subject. My favorite subject.
It's probably the best subject,
it's probably
best
it's
important.
Subject. Yeah, it's very important.
Very important.
So most leaders these days are leading from guitar, right? They're even leading from acoustic or electric. Most of the time it's acoustic. But the first thing that I do when I step into a situation within a band, if it's Jesus culture or if it's in the studio, is to just assess the situation, really. Is to notice what's already being covered and assign myself a job. Rule number one for me, I don't come with an agenda, like we said earlier. I don't come with saying, I'd love to get in a solo today. Or I'd love to, I'd really like to shine.
Usually we're trying to convince you to take one.
Yeah, I'd really like to shine today. It's more like I just want to be a great band member. I want and it goes a long way, guys. It really does. I mean, if you're the kind of guy that shows up to a situation and says, I want to be the best band member I could be instead of the best musician, you're going to get hired for other things. You're going to be the go-to guy if you're like someone that other people want in their band. And so as it pertains to guitar, I'm showing up to a set and I'm saying Chris is playing electric today. He's playing rhythm guitar. And Chris's guitar has electric guitar, and electric setup has a certain sound to it that Chris makes, which is awesome. And it automatically shifts something in me to where I need to cover the rest. I need to cover the rest of what's needed to be covered because he's doing this thing. So for Chris, often that looks like a Gretsch. He's playing, a Gretsch like hollow body or something with filtertrons, and it's creating this Gretsch sound. It's the classic, that great Gretsch sound. And so I am showing up to a sound check with at least two guitars, actually only two guitars, and they're always opposite guitars. They're going to be either like a single coil, like a Strat or a Tele, and then a beefier like a SG or a Gretsch. And so I like to pair opposites with guitars. If Chris is playing his Gretsch, then I'll pick up my Tele or my Strat. If he's playing his Jazzmaster, then I'll pick up my Gretsch or my SG. And so sort of creating those two different textures in electric guitar is really important for the listener to get this full guitar experience sonically. And it's important to know what the guitar does sonically in the room that nothing else is doing, and realize how to accomplish the good EQ and the bad EQ, and all that can be gone more in depth within like tone training and all that. But it really, just to understand rhythm, guitar, and what's being done by the leader is super important to me as a guitar 2, basically. I call guitar 1 rhythm guitar, most important guitar. Guitar 2 is the support, the lead, this guy taking lead lines, but it's not necessarily the person filling energy or driving the band. That's the rhythm guitar. And
sometimes more melodic.
Often more melodic. The great thing about being a valued band member like we're talking about is that role can often change. Right. I think what I do well and what a lot of guitarists do well is to understand what needs to happen regardless of whether or not the rhythm guitar player is doing that. So if if the worship leader decides to throw up his hands and just sing out, or if he's playing but it just sounds weak, to cover that rhythm for him and to kind of set him up and to make him look great, I'm just going to like go in and play rhythm. And I'm going to play rhythm a lot better than most leaders can play rhythm, because I'm only thinking about rhythm. I'm only thinking about my guitar and how it sounds. It's like my job, right? So it's a really great opportunity to like make this driving rhythm sound, if the sound needs that. If the rhythm guitarist or the leader is covering their job well, then I'm freed up to do other things. But just to be a fluid band member, to realize what's needed in the moment. If it's a down moment, a lot of times in down moments, if too many progressions go by, usually more than one or two, I'll jump in and start playing and sort of carrying a progression, because the electric guitar has this frequency range that's really cutting through the mix and carries a lot of chord movement, I guess. Like the pad can do that, but to an untrained ear, to a listener, it just all sounds, like pad, like it kind of less defined than a guitar does. A guitar is less sustained, it's more articulate than I like how I said that, articulate.
It's very articulate.
Than maybe a pad is. So I have the ability to carry a chord progression when the rhythm guitar player isn't doing that. So just being aware of that. Then obviously when the rhythm guitar player is doing his thing, then I can take over and play lead. And so also it's important for me to know the guitar neck, to know where to play on the guitar neck that's not interfering, or know when to double. So a lot of songs, especially on the last two records, we'll do like rhythm guitar doubled, but it'll just be like a single note thing. So it'll be like da 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 da, like low on the low E string and no other notes, and we might double that. A good example might be Fierce. We talked about that earlier. There's a low guitar on the choruses that's just one note instead of like big full chords. So
Holes does that.
yeah, being specific in your rhythm guitar playing, and if the rhythm guitar player, the leader, isn't doing that, maybe that's the most important thing that needs to be covered. So it's also that decision-making thing of like so that I'm going to play this Passion song this weekend. There's 2 guitar parts. I know the leader is going to play electric, but what of those 2 guitar parts is the most important thing? And if the leader isn't covering that, then like making that decision. I know there's 2 things going on. I really want to play this one, but the more important one is over here. So I'm going to play that and fulfill that role. Like I said, knowing the guitar neck, knowing where to play, where to get out of the way of the other guy. That's the head up, eyes up sort of mentality. A lot of times visually on stage, my eyes are either on the drums or on the rhythm guitar player, or if I'm playing rhythm, on the lead guitar player. A lot of times people think I'm mad at me, or I'm mad at them because I have this resting face that's not very, like, I'm not always smiling, I'm just like, so, and
Maybe
it's
not quite like that.
Yeah, well, maybe not like that, but you get the point. It's me focusing and just visually seeing, depending on what my monitor mix is like, seeing what the rhythm guitar player is doing, and either doubling him if it's appropriate, or staying out of his way and going further up the neck. And then same with the drums, locking in with that rhythm. I think of lead playing as advanced rhythm. I'm like, I never want to, I talk about music being, it's half melody, half rhythm. And so as a lead player, I want to be like so solid in my rhythm. That's why when I practice with the metronome. I just want to have an internal sense of rhythm. And so a lot of times on stage, even in the studio, if we're like recording live on the floor, I'll be looking at the snare or the kick, and just like visually I'm like da 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 da, like just right in line with the drums. Practical tip for guitar players that I like to give out just for this applies for most of us, and it's kind of old mentality versus new mentality in my opinion, and that is where to have your amp. And I say get it off stage. And that's a
Absolutely.
loaded topic, because all of a sudden we're like releasing our control. We're saying like, we trust you, sound guy or monitor guy, to do your thing, and I'm gonna put this loud as heck thing away from everything. And like it or not, guitar players, your amp is the loudest thing anybody's ever heard in their whole life. It's so loud, and especially when I'm playing. So getting that as far away as possible is not only going to be a high five to the rest of your band and sort of an honor move for you, but it's going to create trust between you and your sound guy, and open up a dialogue to where not only are you favoring other people, but you're also able to step back and say and hear what how your amp is being perceived by a microphone, and
that's big.
And being able to like play off of that. So as a guitar player, most of us in more professional environments or larger churches are in in-ears, which is, I think it's been a big shift in guitar players playing us. We have a little tiny mic representing those speakers, so playing off of that was a learning curve for me, and I'm sure for you, but knowing how to perceive that microphone and to make adjustments based on mic placement and stuff is going to be a big driving force in your growth in tone. Just knowing what a microphone does, what its tendencies are, where on the amp it's placed, and how that affects the microphone. And it's just going to make you a lot more of a relevant player, really. So get your amps off stage and open up a dialogue with your sound guy. Sound guys can be our nemesis or our best friend, but like it or not, they are your representation. They are the ones that, if you make them mad, is not going to be good for you, because they are representing you to everybody. So without them, you're nothing. Right?
Oh God, yes. Keep a good relationship with your front of house engineer. Don't call him a sound guy. Call him a front of house engineer.
I'm sorry.
Your sound engineer.
Okay.
And after I talk about keys, I want to talk about theory for a minute. I think we were meant to do that back a little bit, but his way of explaining theory and his approach to that, and the resource he has for guitars, are just unbelievable. JeffreyKunde.com.
Thank you.
Okay, keys. Okay, look. Keys, if there's one thing I get from keyboard players all the time, and this is the thing, what do you call us now? Like keyboard, synth, piano, computers, tracks guy, production engineer. It's basically, how do you handle everything?
Yeah.
And what should I do next? What should I do next? And it makes sense, right? Like you have, like I said, you have tracks that you need to get a handle on, and that's its own whole beast. How to split them, how to run the set, transitions with tracks, transitions period. How to play a pad is very different than playing a piano, how to play a synth, how to get a good synth tone, how to, all of this stuff. And then even like stuff like layering, learning how to get different, and it's all different. And it's all dramatically different. I don't want to oversimplify any other instrument, but like once the drums are tuned, they're a drum. Right, and to some degree, when you're going through one amp, there's a limited amount of tone you get, and a limited amount of things that are going to happen. Like it might be awesome and varied, and I've heard some guitar players get an amazing wide range of tone. But with a keyboard, I can turn on a trumpet. Right. With a synth, you pull up and you play a piano, and you're like, okay, I'm good at this. Let's play at church. And you show up on stage, and they put something with 15 faders in front of you, and a reverb pedal, and then sit a guy with a big long bushy beard and a latte in front of you, and say, sound like him, sound like the guy who's been doing the, and it's, the thing is, they're all very different. Like learning how to do a synth, learning how to run tracks, these are all different approaches and different ideas. So the biggest challenge I think that keyboard players face is knowing how to move forward and how to make it simple. So rule number 1, 9. Rule number 1,
dash 9
is, and this I think applies to everything to some degree other than drums, and even to drums to somewhat, and is don't stress out about tracks. And what I mean by that is don't stress out about tracks doing stuff for you. And this is an emotional issue. This one right now, people are tuning out and are leaving this offended and are pissed at me, and that's fine. But look, like, there's a point where being stressed out of your mind, if you haven't figured out, if you can't play, if there's 3 guitar parts and you have 2 guitar players, it doesn't matter. If you want to put the part in the track, put the part in the track. Who cares? Yeah. Like, and if you can't figure out how to play, like, on these albums, like, on the song Halls, there's a few different sounds in there, on the Halls of Heaven, there's a few different sounds in there that I think I spent literally 6 hours figuring out the way I wanted it to sound. And that's absurd. You shouldn't do that. Jeffrey makes fun of me for it regularly. On our last album, he told me once, I said, I'm not quite done with this. And he goes, bro, it's pre-production. You've been working on it for 8 hours. We're going to get dinner.
It was pretty incredible. I mean, I remember walking in at 1 p.m. and then walking in at 4 p.m. and it basically sounded the same.
It did not. It sounded amazing. But the point is, like, if you don't feel like you can play that dumb part, like exactly like I played it, and sometimes it's really hard to play the part, period. And if you don't feel like you can play it and get the right tone, there's nothing wrong or shameful about saying, let the track do it. Like, figure out a cool way to layer behind it. Let it be a crutch for you to learn how to do it, And I'll do this sometimes. There's times we rehearse and I have the track going and I learn the part behind the track. I wrote the part, I programmed the part, and then we show up to rehearsal and I'm the guy Jeffrey was talking about who doesn't know the part. But it's because I was writing the stupid thing for the whole time, right? Yeah. So I get there and I'll sit there and learn it behind it. And after a couple times through, it's like, okay, I got this, and I'll play it. And I oftentimes will play it, I get it to where it sounds just like it. But there's nothing shameful about doing that with in regards to tracks, to letting that carry it. There's nothing, you don't need to get emotional about it. And if there's anything that I regret over the last 10 years or whatever, I have this weird relationship with stress. And I actually had an anxiety attack just a couple months ago on stage on Outcry Tour. I literally kind of blacked out, hit my head on the keyboard, and went into a full-blown anxiety attack right after the set. I don't want to get into it. It's an emotional thing for me. But suffice it to say, my relationship to stress hasn't been great over the last 10 years. And a lot of this has come down to some degree, poor communication by me, but to some degree, needing to do everything so perfectly and so right, and not being willing to let things kind of just work and let things just kind of sit, that I end up feeling too much of a sense of responsibility over stuff. And I think that this is easy. It's that ebb and flow thing. Like we just said, a huge sense of personal responsibility. But I would say when you have 15 roles to fill, pick one and let the other ones do their thing. And rest in that and allow it to work. Because the number one thing that's important, rule number one, nothing can break on the keyboard player's spot. If you have a tracks rig and you're also running patches and stuff, the worst thing that you can do isn't to hit wrong notes. You think it's to hit wrong notes. The worst thing you can do isn't to have bad tone. You think it's bad tone and bad patches. The worst thing you can do is in the middle of the chorus have the computer go, yeah. Right? Like, so first figure out how to get a stable rig. Then figure out how to layer in over the top of these weird things. Understand that the people who are writing these parts that you're trying to emulate, if they're not pianos are different, these sounds and these tones are spending hours and hours and hours and are paid to spend hours and hours and hours and aren't just volunteering on Sunday to come up with a sick synth line. Right? Like understand that and figure out how to fill in. There are times you can just layer over the top of it, and I do that quite frequently. So in order to do that, you need a level of control that a lot of people don't end up having on their set, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. But so it makes a lot of sense. Now, your ability to impact the frequency spectrum. What I want to talk about real quick is this sense of, man, if there's something that I've noticed a shift in between people who are excellent on stage and own the stage from a keyboard perspective, it's two things. One is they're 2 steps ahead of everyone else, and this is because you have to be ready to fire the next song, right? Like you rarely can get caught. You rarely want to be caught behind. So you have to be everything needs to be kind of automatic, and you're thinking a couple seconds ahead because you might have to switch patches. It might be weird to switch patches. It might be weird to get the tones, change the volumes, switch sections if that's necessary. So it's important to be ahead. And then the second thing I would say is that there is a huge space, a huge little space, this little piece of magic that exists between tones and between settings, if you will. And let me explain what I mean. If you follow me a lot, you've heard me harp on this a little bit, but we live in this culture of when we are on this stage with so much technology, and even before computers popped up, we had keyboards that had a bazillion patches. Even this dumb thing has 1,600 patches in it, literally. You go through, literally, you go through, and there's everything under the sun. There's a category in here there's 4 synth categories, and there's vocal drums perk section. Like, the keyboard has so many things that it can be very confusing what to use, but more insidious, in my opinion, is that it's got us thinking in terms of the patch for the section. And I have people ask me this all the time. What patch do you use on the verse of this song? What patch did you use on the chorus of this song? And it's the wrong kind of question. This isn't how I even approach it. What the truth is, if you get a synth in front of you and you use it, especially the really old ones, they didn't have presets. Like, as you go far enough back and there weren't presets at all. And if you get one of those boards that doesn't have a preset, to get from a dark to a bright setting, you have to do something. And it's called use a filter. But the idea is, look, there's actually space between. You can have a sound that goes from bright to dark and bright again. And that movement over the course of a chord, over the course of a whole pre-chorus, over the course of, whatever it is, that, sometimes it's crashing out of a big chorus and you have a bright pad and sweep it down, and you sweep the filter down and it darkens. Like, that level of movement adds a certain amount of energy that you can't get from switching sounds. It just won't happen. And I'm not going to say that keys players are the only people who can do this, but it's very uniquely a keyboard thing to be able to control transitions between settings. To be able to have morphing settings is very different. I think there's a lot of magic there. To do that, you very simply need to set up knobs and faders on your keyboard that control tone and stuff. And this is a whole subject. I talk about synthesis in a lot of my other classes and workshops and stuff. Not to be a pitch, but it's literally like 60 minutes worth of a topic. Like, I could harp on this forever. But really simply, filters, looking at filters, and then reverbs. Filters and reverbs together can change sound so quickly, and if you get it to where you have knobs set up to control those, you're going to find that the bright pad, like when people ask me, what pad are you using in a chorus, or in what synth are you using for that line, and then what pad were you using right afterward, it's oftentimes the same sound. I have a lead sound that I could play poly if I want to, it's not mono, and I could play it as a bright pad, and then when I sweep it down, it's a killer darker sort of worship pad, if you will, or whatever, That same sound, if I turn the reverb up, sustains out really well in what you would call a drone pad. If you hit the freeze button in Ableton, and where you're just sustaining on 1 in 5. If you're new to the synth world, into the pad world, that's a very practical, easy tip for you. Is that the 1 and the 5 of the chord, and Jeffrey can hit theory a little more in a minute or something, but the 1 and the 5 of the chord end up being, and I usually it would be the inversion of that, so the 5 and then the octave up 1. Those 2 notes you can actually sustain over nearly everything. Like, it kind of sounds funny over the minor 2 and stuff, but in general, and if you're sustaining the whole song, you can get away with it. Like, you can usually hold out those 2 notes and have it sound pretty good over anything. And with pads, that's going to be one of your keys, is not having to feel like you're playing like a piano and playing full crazy chords all the time. Just finding a few notes to sustain out and just bouncing around.
One thing I want to say about that I picked up from Ian, that Ian talks about, is... and again, I'm the music director at our church, and I remember a time when a keyboardist came to me and said, I was recommending that he be less busy, that he stop like kind of tinkering around and like making up stuff, and he's like, well, I just get so bored playing the pad. And I was like, oh my gosh, I know somebody for you. It's Ian. And because Ian doesn't get bored playing the pad, and it's because of his musicianship and what we're talking about. It's that fact that he can play a pad, and he knows how much weight a pad can carry, and how much diversity it can carry, but also just how much emotion it can carry just by changing it in these subtleties, like he's talking about, in cutting out all the low end or cutting out all the high end, adding reverb, adding grit. Ian sometimes will have it, be nice and big and full in the verse, and then all of a sudden in the chorus, it's like it gets this like overdrive pedal on it, which is totally sweet, and I have no idea how he does it, but he's basically just manipulating one sound. He talked about doing it with a trumpet, and it's because he can. You can take one sound and you can manipulate it, and I was trying to explain that to our keyboardist. Is like, you have the power and the ability to do something with the room that nobody else can do, and it's just with one sound. It's just with holding down 1 and 5. You can just like start twisting knobs, and you do it in a musical way. I love modern music today, and I love technology because we can just do these tweaks that's just like, oh my gosh, what's happening right now? It's the musicianship of a great keyboardist like Ian. I even remember he was telling me the other day he just played at Bethel Church up in Redding, California, and he was just, all he did was play pad, and he's like, I want somebody else to just like do all the piano parts, and I just want to sit there with a what was it, Juno or something? Yeah, Juno. And he's just like, I'm just gonna like do stuff and manipulate it, and he can pull on emotions and take people on a journey by just playing one note. And so I think that's really important for keyboardists to hear, as we are harping on the bass in sort of the same way, is that like there is no boredom, there's musicianship and kind of how you use it. So
that's good. I'm glad you brought that up. Like, it's people do ask me that, how do you not get bored playing pad? That's probably the second most prevalent thing I get is how do you not get bored playing pad? And it's the same. It's what Jeffrey's saying. It's what we've been saying this entire time. The level of intentionality and being in the moment. Like, if you believe the 2 notes you're playing make a difference, then right away 90% of your boredom will disappear. You're not going to care. There's no time to feel bored.
Yeah.
Right? Like, if you're bored, you're not in the moment enough. You just period. Yeah. You're not being intentional enough on stage if you're bored, and you might be there for the wrong reasons. Like, this gets into a whole other thing, but like and we don't need to do that. But like, and the second half of that, the second side of that coin is that, again, it's not just a pad patch that I'm playing 2 notes on. Like, it's a pad patch and a synth patch and an everything patch, and I'm messing with it and finding the perfect tone and perfect width and depth for that specific moment. And it sometimes morphs based upon what Jeffrey's doing. It sometimes morphs based upon what Brandon's doing. And I don't know that I have a great, if I sat and analyzed it, I guess I could come up with something, but it's a feel thing, and it's an in the moment thing.
You can hear a lot on like the spontaneous moments of a Jesus Culture record. Anytime Kim has the 12-minute song, past 7 minutes, you hear Ian start doing this, and he'll like just start manipulating sound in a way that's creating emotion. And sometimes he like plays like one note on the piano and it's just like totally verbed out. He calls it a sonar, and like little subtleties like that is just like, it's like that bass dropping out thing. It's just like you don't really know what's happening, but you know that you're like engaging as a listener because of these subtleties that can only happen. There's no way it could ever be a tracks thing, like we said in the beginning.
Exactly.
We aren't robots. We aren't up there just pushing tracks. It's a cognitive, it's a decision that I'm making to be present as a musician and to serve the whole purpose of the experience as a listener, as a worshiper, as this corporate journey that we're taking people on. So yeah,
that's super good. To wrap that up as a keys player, like for the keys players, I think all of that in a nutshell, what I'm trying to say is to, instead of look at it like notes and patches, look at it like harnessing technology.
Right.
We have the opportunity. It's not just like I'm not in this fight with this computer that's trying to keep me down. Instead of the man, it's the computer trying to keep me down. Like, you're not in this fight about this. You can harness that and have a lot of fun if you embrace it. And if you have an open heart towards that, and you have an excitement towards the subtleties of it, you can have a lot of fun. And it opens up entire worlds and just simplifies everything and makes everything far less stressful.
Yeah, one thing I forgot to mention earlier, but it's kind of a great segue, because we're talking about this sound spectrum in general now. We've covered all the instruments and kind of the range that they take up and sort of their roles. And it's important to understand, like I said earlier, of like as a musician, what is the highest notes, what are the middle notes, and what are the lowest notes that are being played, and how does that build up a chord? And I wanted to just briefly touch on that as it pertains to like a chord chart and stuff. A bass player, like I said, it carries the lowest note in the crowd, and so just knowing what to when to play an inversion of the chord, when to like jump up and play the slash chord. So a lot of times on chord charts, you'll see like what if it's a C over G or a C over F or something? What does that really mean? Well, it's referring to, broadly, it's referring to the sound spectrum. It's referring to, as a listener, the listener is supposed to hear a C chord with an F in the bass. So automatically we're needing to play an F on the lowest instrument. If that in the moment is the keys, because there's no bass and the keys needs to play an F. If it's a bass player, the keys could or couldn't play an F. Technically, it doesn't always matter.
Right.
And that's a decision thing, like we've been talking about, making the right decision of what chord to play.
And oftentimes that's just following the leader.
And following the leader, yeah.
Oftentimes in the moment, the leader will just play the other chord.
Yeah, so
Like,
there's no, we're talking about musicianship. There's no reason why you shouldn't be always developing your ear to hear chords, to be able to perceive chords, to your ear training and your knowledge of basic music theory, knowledge of the number system. There's plenty of resources online. I have a few, but you can't learn too much about music theory. Basically, you can apply too much about music theory. Those are theory nerds, but we're not going to worry about them because most of them aren't in the church anyway. So,
Zing.
yeah, that's my little harp on theory. But just basically knowing. Theory to me is less heady and more like ears involved. It's more about just understanding what's going on, and with that knowledge, what are we going to do about it? So understanding how chord progressions work, how low notes and like adding bass notes to chords works together, how to build chords, and how to like use that information to create a more musical experience. So.
Yeah, and would you take a minute real quick and just talk about why the number system's awesome?
Yeah, so number system is sort of a shorthand to communication on a stage or in a studio. Basically what we're doing is the number system is an assigning of numbers within a key signature. So a lot of times guys don't even know what a key signature means. They're just showing up, they're reading chords on a page, and they don't know that those chords encompass a key signature, that the song has a home base, and that home base is the one chord, or it's the key signature of the song. So C major, regardless of whether the song starts on an F chord and ends on an E chord, and the chorus starts on a G chord, if the home base of the song is a C chord, then the song is in C, and obviously that would take a lot of time to unpack. But what I'm saying is that there's a certain amount of chords within each key signature, and those chords get numbers. And so how we apply that live or in the studio is really great. And it might sound confusing right now, but let me tell you that all professional instrumentalists, all successful instrumentalists know this. So if you don't know it, you need to get to know it. But what we do is, like, in the moment, we'll just be like, we're going to play a 1-4-5 progression. And we know that in the key of C major, that means C, F, G. Now, when it gets really useful is when the leader says, you know what, I'd rather switch to G major. It's better for my voice. This is in a more of a feminine key. So he switches to G major, and all of a sudden I don't need a chord chart because I know the chord progression stayed the same. It's still 1-4-5. So my brain knows that the 1-4-5 progression in G major is G, C, D. So knowing all the progressions in every key signature, or all the chords in every key signature and their assigned numbers, is a very, very big deal. Ian knows it. All of our instrumentalists on our team know it. It's a requirement to be on my team. And a lot of times it's a requirement to just get hired. It's something that we assume about people nowadays in 2017. So if you aren't on board, I encourage you to get on board with the Nashville number system.
Yeah, when we started implementing it in our world, like it made a huge difference for me. I remember when we were doing it, it was very hard for me to figure it out. I was one of those. It wasn't, I knew what key we were playing in, and I knew how to improvise in that key or whatever. But so I wasn't like locking myself to chords, but my brain wasn't working that way. In a sense, I was looking at a chord chart and I was going, okay, we're in the key of D. So when someone says let's play an A now, my brain fell apart. like just turned to mush, and so I'd have to rewrite everything. And it was really hard for me to start thinking about numbers, but what I found was as I did, my ears started working better, just naturally. Mm-hmm. Like my ability to notice stuff like, that's a 1-5-6-4 progression, or that's, that note is the third of the, is the third of the key or the third of the chord, or whatever you want to say. Like my ability to identify that stuff has improved dramatically, and I think it's directly from that. Like my instincts have improved, right? My ability to know, like, oh, that feels like this. Like I know if something's a 6 by the feel now. I'm not trying to be, I'm not like, that sounds like a B minor. Like that's stupid.
Yeah.
Like I don't need to know what a B minor sounds like if I know it's the minor 6 of, the key of D or something. And,
right.
And the thing is, I don't think about it much now. Like, when this is where it's interesting, because I'll get in and play. Half the songs at Bethel that I played, I didn't ever hear. I hadn't played. I was doing So Jesus culture mostly. I didn't really know them. And honestly, you're able to just feel like, oh, this is the chord movement. I know exactly where to put my hands, even though I have no idea what the progression is. Like, I didn't have a chord chart, I didn't have whatever. I was able to flow and follow. And a lot of that has to do with that instinctive understanding. And I credit the number system with doing that for me.
Absolutely, yeah. Being a by ear player is rule number 1-10. It's
That's rule number 1.
Being able to hear something and replicate it without making minimal mistakes and without a chord chart is insanely valuable as a musician, and that's all the number system is trying to teach you. Really, it's training your ear to recognize patterns within chord progressions and to apply them. So
yeah, and from a practical level, if I'm looking at Brandon and we're in a really intimate mode. Here's the other deal, real quick, on MD mics. Like, they sound amazing, and a lot of things that we talk about, like you're going to say, you could just do that with an MD mic. But there's something about yelling in the worship leader's ear in an intimate moment that just is wrong. Like, like Kim's like, singing something amazing, and there's just people everywhere just crying, and stuff's happening, and then I'm like, Brandon, go to the 6. Yeah. And Kim just, like everything dies, and then you get the look. But the so getting Brandon's attention and going like, being able to put up a number. Someone tell me what C sharp is in right? Like I don't know. Yeah, like okay, there you go. C sharp. Jeffrey came up with it. That also looks a lot like. I just came
up with it. It's really great. It's gonna take off.
Yeah, it also looks like B and D.
Yeah.
So being able to say 1, 2, 3, and this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then you can go 6, 7. And you're pretty good. Like that's actually enough. I can play with one hand and look at him and go like this, and he go like this, and he knows it's a 6. Like this is something that you can do really easily and really quickly without having to pantomime on stage or yell in the worship leader's ear like go to the 6 now. Like you can all kind of get this flow going. From a really practical standpoint, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Sweet.
All right. I think that's about it for us. Thanks for coming and hanging out again. Today you can own this workshop if you enjoyed it. You can get it for half off, and it comes with a bunch of bonuses. We haven't talked about this, but we're going to do a QA on Monday with anyone who purchases. So if you buy today or this weekend, we're going to invite you to a private QA and be able to answer your questions one-on-one in an intimate environment and in a personal, more sort of chill environment. And in addition, we're going to include a couple of extra videos for anyone who wants to come on that journey with us. We're going to talk about our sound check strategy, and you'll be able to see that as soon as you purchase in your little online account. You'll get access to our exact sound check strategy, and it really simplifies the process. There's a big difference between absolute chaos on stage and having it just feel good, and it's easy to pull off.
Yeah, within that too, we're going to talk about our own personal mixes, like how we monitor ourselves and the rest of the band, which is rule number 1-11 is having a great monitor mix that you feel like you can do your job with. So I'm going to talk about mine as a guitar player. He's going to talk about his as a keyboard player, and there's a lot of cool pro tips in there that you guys are really going to want to hear. So
I talked about this with some of my students in a different class, some of it, and it made a huge impact. That was one of the most, I said it as an afterthought, it was one of the things I got the most feedback on, was how simple, if you make sound checks simple and you really solve the problem ahead of time and have a plan, it changes everything. It's incredible. In addition, we'll be having also one video on our our opinions on transitions and some practical things each instrument can do to help with transitions. That's another big problem a lot of worship teams have asked us about, and we just don't have time to address right now in this workshop those things. So anyway, thanks again so much. If you want that, you just click the buy button. We'll get it in your account. Thanks for coming and hanging out. We appreciate it. Watch your inbox. If everyone loves this, let us know what you think. First off,
Yeah.